The national strike for more than 155,000 federal public servants has entered its second work week. One of Canada's largest labour disruptions continues in different cities across the country. Picket lines may continue to move to strategic locations that have a bigger impact on the federal government. This, as negotiations have so far not yielded an agreement between the two sides. Chris Aylward is the national president of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. He joins me now in the studio. Chris Aylward, good to see you again.
Great to be here.
We've got an open letter from Mona Fortier today, the minister responsible for this in the government. She says there are 4 outstanding issues: wage increases, telework as a negotiated right, a ban on contracting out, and a requirement that in the event of downsizing, seniority reigns over merit. Is that an accurate assessment of where things stand?
That's very accurate as to what the minister put out today, and I actually applaud the minister for putting this letter out. It's the first time that she's actually put our priority issues on the table. So I see this as a good signal. I'm still hopeful that we're going to get to a deal, and that's what we want to do. We want to get to a deal and end this strike.
What do you make of her doing this now? I mean, it's an open letter to public servants and Canadians. When the employer starts trying to negotiate or to speak directly to your members, that can often be a bit of a flashpoint in talks, but you don't seem too bothered by this.
I don't see it that way, David. As I said, I characterize this as a good signal. That we escalated some of our strike actions today across the country, and I see this as a good thing, as the minister just laying out what our priorities are, and that's the first time that she's done that.
Where are things right now in terms of the mood at the table? Because when you were in here last week, I felt like I took the impression that this could be a short strike, that there progress was being made. But then it got a bit heated the weekend. You called the Treasury Board Minister, Mona Fortier, incompetent in your news conference on Saturday. Where are things in these negotiations?
We're still at the table. And as long as we're at the table, David, that's a good thing. Because as I said, our goal is to get to a deal and end this strike. The minister, the government obviously knows what the priorities are. They know our position on those priorities. They have to come to the table and actually address those issues now that the minister has put it out there.
So you called the minister, though, incompetent. I mean, why did you? That's a strong accusation to throw around if talks are in fact going well. Why did you say that? What did you mean by that?
Because at that time on Thursday, David, we had been waiting for more than 30 hours for a response from the employer on one issue. We gave the employer a comprehensive package Thursday evening. On Friday morning, we were told by the employer we would get a response. Saturday morning, we still had no response. We waited for over 30 hours. Our bargaining teams are very frustrated. And again, it's almost like a delay, as that, we have over 100,000 members out on strike. There should be a little bit more urgency from the government on these issues and getting them addressed, and not having our bargaining teams wait for more than 30 hours for the employer to address one issue.
Mona Fortier says in her letter that you came to the table with about 570 issues, 570 demands, and most of those have been dealt with. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is very accurate as to, most of the issues have been dealt with. But there's still some, priority issues that we haven't reached a deal on, and that's really what we're looking at to get to a deal, is to have those issues addressed.
So those 4 there, does that mean 566 have been settled? I mean, is it the math that simple, or are these really the ones that are at the core of why you're on strike?
Yeah, that's I guess a more fair assessment as to these are the issues that are really sort of at the table that we're trying to work through because that's what we need to get to a deal. The government is well aware of that.
They're pretty clear, though, if you listen to what Mona Fortier said. She was on Ottawa Morning, the radio program here on CBC here in Ottawa, saying that she believes that it should be remote work should be left at the managerial level within each department. It seems like they are determined not to give this as something that will be baked into your collective agreement. Do you think this one can be solved?
Absolutely. Look, we're not trying to negate managerial rights here or anything like that. In every single Treasury Board agreement that we have, there's an article within the first 6 or 7 articles about managerial rights, and that nothing in the collective agreement can contravene the managerial rights. So we're not asking for anything more. We're just saying Put the language in the collective agreement. We're not, negating managerial rights by doing that.
But why do you think they're so determined not to give it to you? I mean, she's committing, Mona Fortier is in this letter, to doing some sort of a joint review to figure out how it works, especially post-pandemic, where this fits into the overall operational plan for the federal government. Why do you think they're so determined not to put this into the collective agreement and keep you, if that's the hang-up here? That's
a great question for the minister. We don't know because, again, the minister has repeatedly stated it's managerial rights. Well, our collective agreements are full of managerial rights, and as I said, there is an article there that say anything in this collective agreement does not, preclude any managerial rights. So again, that's a great question for the minister as to why they're so reluctant to do that.
But you're also seeking a total ban on contracting out. And I know there's been political controversy for the use of consultants like McKinsey and others because of the reputational issues and maybe the political connections with the people who are in those companies. But why a total ban on that? I mean, isn't there a point in time where the government is going to need to go outside of the expertise of the public service and pay for maybe gaps in the knowledge that exists within the civil service?
Yeah, and David, we're not saying that we want zero contracting out. When we look, especially in departments of Veterans Affairs, National Defense as well, for an example, we see many of our jobs being contracted out. And we know, and we can demonstrate this. When you contract out public service work, it costs more to the taxpayers with very little accountability. If it's being done within the public service, there's more scrutiny, there's more accountability, and it's done more effectively and efficiently. Because, as I said, anytime public services are contracted out, it always costs the taxpayers more.
But Mona Fortier says you're calling for a ban on contracting out. Is it an absolute ban? Because I know they've committed to reducing the amount of money they spend on this as a cost-cutting measure and sort of a political issues management measure as well. But I mean, how restricted do you want this measure to be?
That they're not contracting out federal public sector workers' jobs, because that's what they're doing. If they want to hire management consultants to come in to tell them they got to hire more consultants, that's one thing. But when they start contracting out the work that our members do, as I said, Canadians suffer, an improved program delivery of that service, and it always costs the taxpayers more. Always.
Have you had any movement on wages since last week? I know they'd moved up to 9%. You said you'd come down a little bit from the 13.5. Have you moved any closer on that, or is it just status quo on the money issue?
No, I mean, the employer's position is 9%. We have moved off our 13.5%. Because that's what negotiations are. There is compromise that has to be done on both sides. And we've moved down from our 13.5%, but it is still very, very important that we make sure that our members, especially our lower paid members, those who are making between $40,000 and $65,000 a year, that they stay in line with inflation.
The 13.5% is the demand for the big bargaining unit. There is a smaller bargaining unit that represents Canada Revenue Agency workers, and the demand is higher there. It's over 20%. Is there still that big of a gap in that particular unit? Because we've heard from people on the picket lines, this is a city of civil servants, where there's some concern by people in the bigger unit that things could be held up by the demands of the CRA employees. Any progress on that one?
Yeah, I mean, they're still at the table as well. So the 4 Treasury Board tables are still at the table. The Canada Revenue Agency team are still at the table. So we're at the table with all 5 teams, and we're still talking, which is a good thing.
Okay, so you're still talking, but it's day 6 now. I mean, what's your sense on the possibility of a settlement at some point this week?
I remain hopeful, we remain hopeful that we can get to a deal and end this strike for our members and for Canadians so that our members can get back to work and start delivering the programs that Canadians depend on.
You talked about escalating your picket action, maybe targeting things like ports, which are essential to the economy. Some will call that critical infrastructure, the sort of thing. If it starts to get disrupted in a big way, governments might be tempted to use things like back-to-work legislation. How far are you prepared to go in that escalation?
That's, the members had escalated actions today. If we don't get a deal, by tomorrow morning, I'm sure you're going to see the members take more escalation actions tomorrow as well.
But will you target economically important infrastructure? I mean, ports, you start getting in the way. I mean, cost of living has been caused by snarls in supply chains, slowing the deliveries of goods and services in and out at the Port of Vancouver and Halifax and these sorts of things, or Port of Montreal. That's where you could start running into some backlash potentially and economic stress and concern for the government. I mean, are you prepared to shut those down, or are you just prepared to slow those up, or what's your intention there?
We're prepared to put impact and pressure on the government where the government is feeling it, and we're having the least amount of inconvenience for the public. And that's where we're focused on, is trying to, when we have these strategic picketing, is that we have an impact on the government and the least impact on the, Canadians as much as possible. And again, I asked Canadians for their patience. We will get through this. There will be an end to this. And I want to thank Canadians, because in a recent poll, we have the support of Canadians. More than half of Canadians support this strike.
This is the Angus Reid Institute poll you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what message do you take from that data? I mean, I don't have it at my fingertips. I think it's about 55% talked about supporting your wage increase. I mean, you see that as a sign that the public is firmly with you on this?
Look, I mean, the Canadians, I believe, support the strike because they realize what we're asking for. Every single worker, as we've been saying, every single worker in this country deserves that fair, decent wage increase.
Okay. Chris Aylward, National President of Public Service Alliance of Canada, thank you so much for coming in again. We always appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to turn now to Mona Fortier. She is the president of the Treasury Board, and she joins me from the foyer of the House of Commons. Minister, last week when we spoke, you said you couldn't get into specific details about the issues at the bargaining table, and now I've got a letter you sent to Treasury Board members walking us through the details and what the various positions are. So why the shift in approach here in issuing this open letter?
Well, first, thank you for having me today. And second, it was a lot of information going around, misinformation, and it was important to be factual and share with employees and also Canadians how and where we are at on this journey of negotiations that we've been. Therefore, we're presenting factual information and ensuring Canadians are aware, and also employees are aware of what is discussed.
You say there was misinformation going around out there? Was just a misunderstanding, or do you think there was a deliberate attempt to put out bad information here by any of the parties involved?
Well, I'm not in the mood to go in accusations. I think that a lot of people have different perceptions, and I think it was important to share factual information, and that is why the open letter, I believe, brings the matter of where we are. I want to remind Canadians and also employees, we started with a position of 570 demands on the table, and we made a lot of progress in these negotiations, and now we have a few handful, and this is where we need to focus, both the union and the government, to get to a deal, and then to be able to start delivering services for Canadians normally.
But is this an attempt for the employer to write this letter and send it directly to all the employees to spell out the issues as you see it at the bargaining table? Chris Aylward actually called it a good sign. I've spoken to other people who saw it maybe as a little bit of a provocation to speak directly to the members on the picket line rather than with the union leadership. I mean, just how do you think this could affect the tone of things?
To inform, to be factual, to be open to employees and Canadians. There's been a lot of questions that were asked by employees. We've been encouraging employees to ask the union of their union rep to ask the questions, and that's what we're trying to do, and to make sure that we also demonstrate that we are working very hard. We've done a lot of progress. We have now come to, of course, wages and the other issues that are presented in the letter. And we want to continue to work together. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is that, of course, employees have the right to strike. This is something that we recognize that right. And it was trying to bring everyone on the same page on a factual base.
But on the remote work, on teleworking, you have asserted time and again that you view this as a management right, and the Public Service Alliance of Canada says they want this baked into their collective agreement. When you assert something as a management right, that sounds to me like you're just not prepared to negotiate this into the collective agreement whatsoever. You've offered to do a review and have a discussion around the policy, but as for making this an article in the collective agreement, as the union insists, that sounds like a red line for government. Am I reading that correctly?
It is a red line. It is the right of management, and we have found creative ways to, of course, engage with employees. And I believe that because it's so important that we have, the flexibility for managers to see how we are going to best deliver services. That's why we suggested, outside of the collective bargaining, to do that review. And I think that we have something that is good on the table at this time.
The tone of the conversation seemed to escalate a little bit on the weekend, with Chris Aylward at a press conference on Saturday calling you incompetent. I mean, what do you make of that kind of language, and what does that tell us about where negotiations are on the possibility of a settlement to this strike are on day 6?
Yeah, David, I won't be distracted by these types of comments. For me, it's really, really important that we focus on the fact that I have a responsibility to make sure that we have a fair deal for employees, and also that is reasonable to Canadians. I have to strike that balance. Our negotiating team is working very hard. We're at the table and we're putting all of our efforts to get to a deal. I think that one thing the union and the employer have in common is that we want to find the best way to deliver services to Canadians, and we understand that. Now, we have a good deal on the table. I think that we are at a point now where we can show, especially with the wages, we've increased to the PIC report, the Public Interest Commission recommendation report, to 9%, and we have a good deal on the table.
Aylward, Chris Aylward and other union leadership have talked about escalating their strike actions, even suggesting heightened activity at places such as ports and other critical economic infrastructure across the country. What will the government's response be should PSAC members start interfering with the activities at key economic ports? Well,
first, again, it's a respect that they can have a right to strike. The government will continue, because we are still at the table and working at the table, focus on our energy on getting a deal done, and that's the best way that we can get the best deal done. So we will concentrate on what's happening at the table.
So Minister, if you're at 9% over 3 years on wages, and you said in the House of Commons today that what PSAC wants is unaffordable, and if remote work is a red line, how optimistic are you that this can be resolved even this week? Because those seems like two fundamental issues where there is a gap that doesn't seem likely to be bridged anytime soon.
Well, again, I believe that we have a very good deal on the table. I believe that we have courageous, difficult conversations happening between the negotiators and the team, and we will have to assess on how we are following the next, hopefully, few days, and then reassess and see how we go about. I want to, mention that we have brought our deal to wages on the PIC report. We weren't there before, but we did up it to 9%, and that is something that we recognize. And then for the other issues, I know the negotiators are working very hard to get to a deal.
Okay, President of the Treasury Board, Mona Fortier, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, David.